2025 is around the corner and we have absolutely no word on Dragon Quest 12. Usually this would be the time of year to look back at 2024 and reminisce about all the great stuff that happened, like the anti-rogue outrage. I'd rather look into the future and tell you about my hopes and expectations for the Dragon Quest franchise in the upcoming year. A video that by design will age like milk. I want to get this out before 2025, so I won't edit it in too much detail. Instead, as background footage, I will put a clip of me beating Shenlong with the party I had at the end of the Dragon Quest 3 without random encounters video. A couple people asked me about it, and beating him at all is not really a big deal. But as it turns out, even beating him in 15 or less actions is not that difficult and only took me a handful of tries. Definitely isn't worth a video of its own. So back to what this video is about. Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD are scheduled for 2025, and my first hope is that they don't get delayed, which isn't a given. But for now I want to work under the assumption that these two games will release in 2025, meaning the main question is whether they will end up being good. And I do think that these two games have a golden opportunity to learn from the Dragon Quest 3 HD remake, to take the essence of these two classic games that they're remaking and to make something truly memorable. Right-wing regressives like to say that the people remaking games don't have the qualifications to make changes to the original. For example, one of the 10 first videos that come up when you type Dragon Quest into YouTube and sort by views.
It's always my favorite is that these people who you don't even know their names think that they have the awareness and, the artistic mandate to change the person's art.
But I personally don't want Dragon Quest 1 again. I don't want Dragon Quest 2 again. I've already played those games. I want the remakes to take liberties and to make something that feels like Dragon Quest 1 or 2 did back on release. 3 HD got this right in many aspects. Mimic placements were changed in the Mirror of War dungeon. For example, the very first chest that you'd even walk past when you know how to navigate that cave is now a mimic. And I'd wager this was a surprise to many people that already know the original by heart. And this extends to the story. Some of the extra scenes are overbearing, but something that really caught me were the added story beats with the mom. It was always weird how she waited for you every night, and even if you didn't return home, she'd spend the whole night standing in front of your home. It hints at her being worried to death and being deeply conflicted about letting her only child go down the same path, and the remake expanding on that and adding more scenes is great. I find myself wishing that they added even more, for example after reviving Ortega. I get not having another after you find Ortega, it would be cruel to tell your mom that he died, but I still would have liked a little more. Some changes in 3 HD however weren't great. They added these kittens in front of doors that you could open sooner than intended via the click spell in the earlier versions. And that defeats the whole point of still having the click spell. It's supposed to open doors before you do the side quest to get the key. The same goes for the blockade before you can enter Portega, the one that only goes away after you beat Robin Hood. You used to be able to get all the way to the Old Trades Abbey without a single boss fight. And that used to be something that allowed gimmicky parties to still function without massive grinding. Now, however, you have to beat 2 bosses before you can get to the Abbey. That might be in line with Dragon Quest 3, which if you break it down is a very linear game where it's always clearly communicated where you have to go. But at the same time, the original was very good at giving you at least the illusion of non-linearity and of exploration, and that aspect is something of value that was lost in transition. But what I was getting at is that the overall change was 100% for the better. Experimenting with party compositions made me feel like I was playing Dragon Quest 3 for the first time again. Something that all the other versions that I already knew weren't able to make me feel anymore. I really like that they changed up the balancing, even if there are some nitpicks, as you can probably tell from the background footage. So what I'm hoping for when it comes to Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD is that the dev team takes even more liberties and doesn't feel restricted by what was already there. I want the Cave to Roan to be an absolute nightmare, even for the people whose brains have already been permanently scarred by it. And I want Dragon Quest 1 to still be a completely open game where any location has its own objective that can be done immediately, and I want to feel lost in it again. That one especially is going to be hard because they can't just change the map, but maybe they can add more important items, they can change where you find certain important items, maybe add more quests, And anyway, it's something to make the game feel like Dragon Quest 1 did back in the day. Looking back at the entire series past, the changes the remakes did were almost always for the better, but I feel as if the ones that were bad because they were implemented half-heartedly. And this might be controversial, I think the same goes for the localizations as well, which leads me to what I'm hoping for from the localization team when it comes to Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD. I want them to for once not half-ass it. I made that video about a haiku where I tried to be neutral and searched for a few of the better ones. But when each of the gimmicks the localization experiments with only results in something interesting 20% of the time, and you know it's cringy in all the other use cases, then something is wrong. And we know it's not the gimmicks inherently. Parts of Dragon Quest 8's and Dragon Quest 11's localizations are absolutely iconic in the Western Dragon Quest community. But I believe it fails when the localization team tries to translate text one-to-one despite their gimmicks, like with the obtrusive dialects in Dragon Quest 4 or the haiku. Or it happens when the gimmick seems forced, like when NPCs in Dragon Quest 7 randomly saying yet or mamma mia in the middle of a regular sentence. The good ones are the ones where they don't harm readability and don't get in the way of concision. In other words, when they are a natural fit, and there are two ways of achieving that. You either only apply a gimmick when you see it making sense, or you change the original around it to fit the gimmick. And I want the localization to make up its mind and not give us a frankly sloppy localization like with 3HD, which, don't get me wrong, is good for most of it. But if I had to say, about a quarter of all the text in that game is garbage. Besides the Dragon Quest 1 and 2 remakes, I have other hopes for Dragon Quest, and my biggest one is that we get some more news on Dragon Quest 12. I'm going to go on and make an unfounded guess that it's going to be released relatively soon after we get some word on it. I don't think it's going to take years of waiting after we get something to chew on. But before we get something to chew on, I do think it's going to be a while. In other words, at least until the end of 2025, if not longer. That's just speculation though. There's a lot that I could say about Dragon Quest 12 and what I want from it, but I think it's much too early for that. I also don't expect any other HD 2D remakes to be announced or released, and frankly I'm not assuming that the Zenithian trilogy is going to ever get that treatment. Especially 5 already had the 3D PS2 remake, and forcing that game back into sprites would almost feel like a downgrade. I firmly believe that it's going to be a self-contained thing for the original trilogy. I'd be pleasantly surprised by those remakes, but I'm not getting my hopes up. And this might have painted a picture that I think the future is dark for Dragon Quest, but I don't necessarily think so. This is nowhere near comparable to the Dragon Quest Dark Age in the West, and this is also nowhere near comparable to the Dragon Quest Dark Age in Europe that ended with the release of Dragon Quest 8. Now will always be the best time to be a Dragon Quest fan. It only gets better. And while we haven't had another mainline game since Dragon Quest 11, which released back in 2017, there's much more to Dragon Quest than mainline games having a number in their title. And I do believe that the good spin-offs and remakes got that idea. What makes a Dragon Quest game isn't in the title, and it isn't in the name of the people that worked on it. And that's why I'm hoping that Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD will really put in some work. Dragon Quest 3 and all previous versions was in my eyes a better game than the first two, which makes sense since it came out after and could improve on them. And now 1 and 2 HD are releasing after 3 HD. And I really do believe that with enough innovation and most importantly love for the source material, those new games can be even better than the remake of 3. The standard should and just might be that these will be games that we'll be able to recommend to people because they're standalone good products. And not because if you imagine how amazing they were back in the day, you might just be able to find some appreciation for what they were trying to do. Because the Dragon Quest 1 and 2 remakes that are scheduled to release in 2025, they are going to be released as new games. It's not a port, but a remake, and as such it should be held to the industry standards for a game that releases in 2025. If I'm being realistic, I don't think they will. But if the 1 and 2 remakes manage to be nearly as much fun to play as 3 HD was, then in my eyes it's looking bright up ahead. I have a feeling 2025 is gonna be a good year for Dragon Quest. And lastly, I really hope that we can go this year without any grifting.